We use an airbrush on the majority of our projects, and we're big fans of them. And to be honest, we think they're an essential part of the modern painter's toolkit. We've got thousands of hours of use on personal projects and commission work, and we've taught hundreds of people all over the world how to use their airbrush from the very first time through to advanced techniques. We've also worked with leading airbrush manufacturer Harder and Steenbeck to develop two of our own signature series airbrushes. And whilst nothing's going to beat face-to-face classroom style teaching on getting to grips with your airbrush, we wanted to provide at least a starting point to help people getting into airbrushing become confident to go away and use all the amazing free tutorials or attend classes where they can then get the most out of that tool. So in this first video in the series, we're going to take a look at the brush itself, its benefits and its limitations, and the kit that goes with it. We never solely use an airbrush on a project. It's simply one part of our toolkit, and there are jobs where it's appropriate to use one, and there are jobs where it would be more appropriate to use a hairy brush or another technique. Some pieces we will barely use an airbrush on at all, and others will use it for a vast majority of the work, particularly when it comes to army painting, and particularly sci-fi models where you have a lot of armour. The airbrush becomes absolutely invaluable, and it will save you a huge amount of time. So let's have a look at the three main uses we have for our airbrush on a project. Firstly, pre-shading or pre-highlighting. This is where we create contrast of light and dark on a model. Very often this will be done with black and white to create a grayscale. It's a fantastic way to quickly establish a strong light source, but it can also really aid certain colours with that punch of brightness that you wouldn't be able to get by traditionally layering the colours up on top of each other. Red is a classic example of this. Practicing getting good at your grayscale or pre-shading is a fantastic way to improve at airbrushing. And by the time that you've pre-shaded 50 troops or a couple of tanks, you're going to be an awful lot more confident in your airbrush. You're going to understand how near or far away from the model you need to be to paint, the angle you want to hold the model at, and also things like your paint consistency. The great strength of the airbrush is that it allows us to apply very, very thin layers of paint and build them up slowly. This means we can create incredibly smooth transitions. The second major use, particularly with army painting, is going to be laying down your main colours or colour application. Very often you're going to do this over your grayscale, and again by using very, very thin layers of paint, we let some of that light and dark show through underneath. And with certain colours, you just need one coat of, say, red over a grayscale, and you can have a huge variety of tones coming from just one paint. And because we can build up the layers slowly, and they're very, very thin, it means we generally don't obscure any detail. There's a huge variety of paints that are excellent to use through your airbrush, and we're going to dedicate an entire video to talking about these, how you mix them, and then how you put them through the brush itself. And the last job that we use our airbrush for on nearly every project that we do is for varnishing. And we might apply polyurethane varnish to protect the model, or we might just be applying a normal acrylic gloss or satin or matte to change the finish on the model. The precision that the airbrush gives us rather than say a rattle can varnish is why we love using it for this job. There are an awful lot of products out there to do with airbrushing, but this is the list that we would recommend everybody starts with, and it's what we use day to day when we're painting. Firstly, you're going to need a compressor. Typically, these are going to be an oilless single piston air compressor, either with or without a tank. They have a regulator and they have a water trap. The tank will cost you slightly more, and the benefits of the tank supposedly are a more consistent airflow, quieter running machine, and less wear and tear in general. Lots of different brands make them. You have the typical AS series, which are often rebranded by a lot of people that you can see in these photos. And then you have brands like Sparmax and Iwata, who use better materials, better machining, better warranty, etc. etc. We own and use all three of those that I've just mentioned. Next, you're going to want an air hose to connect the compressor to the airbrush. I'd always recommend that you buy a spare one of these for the time that you inevitably get some moisture in your air hose and you need to paint for a deadline. Take the hose off, put the new one on, and you can crack on. The majority of airbrushes, Iwatas, Harder and Steenbecks, and the knockoff versions of those that you often get with the compressor kits, they all have a 1/8 inch attachment for the hose. So it's always worth checking when you buy the hose or the compressor what size the various ends are. I know that Badgers have a particularly small thread, and you will definitely need to get an adapter to use them with compressors and other hoses. But as I say, the majority are 1/8 inch, sometimes they have a 1/4 inch connector on the compressor itself. If you get a kit and you find that they don't meet, don't worry about it, you can get adapters, they're not expensive. A really useful bit of kit is an airbrush cleaning pot. You can rest your airbrush in there, spray in the excess paint that you don't need to use, spray in your cleaner, circulate it around, clean the end of the brush. They're just a really useful little bit of kit to have. Another nice bit of kit is a quick release connector, and you can pick these up for a couple of pounds from any airbrush shop or online retailer. And it's exactly what they sound like. They go between the airbrush and the hose, and you can quickly release them. This is particularly helpful if you keep your airbrush in the airbrush cleaning pot when you're not using it. Countless times I've spun round in my chair, caught my knee in the hose, and launched an airbrush cleaning pot full of disgusting paint water across my floor. Whereas if you have the quick release hose, when you're finished, you just unhook it and you're not having to worry. Now we'll take a quick look at the products that actually help us use paint in the airbrush. And first up is Acrylic Airbrush Thinner. There's a variety of brands who do this, nearly every paint range will have their own thinner, but the vast majority of the time the paints that we're using to paint our models with, things like Citadel, Vallejo, P3, Scale 75, all of those thinners will work absolutely fine with each other's paints. There is an exception to this, and that's Tamiya, but we'll talk about that more in the painting video. So I'll just pick up whatever my local hobby store has in stock. Then you're going to want some cleaner. You really don't need to be using harsh solvents to keep your airbrush clean. The proprietary cleaners by a lot of these brands are fantastic, and a big bottle's going to last you probably a year. Yes, of course, you can make up a big batch of your own with distilled water, isopropyl alcohol, etc. But I'm a big fan of using these for convenience. I'd also recommend picking up a couple of these swan neck water bottles. You often see them used in tattoo parlours. They're just super useful to keep water or a little bit of isopropyl or whatever in, and it's just easier to decant those into your airbrush than using a dropper or pouring them in. And lastly, one of the most essential pieces of kit is a good quality respirator. Whilst the majority of paints that we use for hobbying with are non-toxic, that just means if you eat them you're not going to get poorly. You don't want to be aerosolizing them and then breathing them in. So a good quality mask is going to set you back probably £20 or so here in the UK, but that's going to last you for a long time. You don't need to be changing the filters very regularly at all. You're not spending 12 hours a day airbrushing cars and whatnot. The most important piece of kit, of course, is the brush itself. And we always recommend a double action gravity fed airbrush. Our two signature series airbrushes, the Evolution and the Infinity, are absolutely perfect for what we do in our hobby and how we paint. They come with a 0.4mm needle and nozzle, and we find that we can achieve everything we need to with that and get very few blockages, and therefore generally have an enjoyable time airbrushing without constantly having to clean it. So get yourself a needle somewhere in that 0.3 to 0.5mm range. I hope you've enjoyed this video where we look at the initial approach to how we airbrush and how we recommend people start airbrushing. It really is an amazing time for hobbyists at the moment. There are so many cool products and tutorials available to help you get more out of your painting. Picking up an airbrush and becoming competent with it opens up a whole world of hobby possibilities. It can really increase and improve the enjoyment and outcome of different projects. We love hearing from people when they've picked up one of our Signature Series airbrushes and show us the models that they've been painting with it. Being able to share this knowledge and these products with you is something we really enjoy. Now, if you're still watching, hit that like button, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe so you don't miss out in the next video in the series. And I'll see you next time.